Part 1. Blackwood. We run a small urban exploration channel. Nothing huge, maybe 40,000 subscribers. The kind of channel where 4 friends with decent cameras and a taste for abandoned places can turn a Saturday night into content. Grain elevators, shuttered malls, a half-demolished amusement park 2 states over. We'd done maybe 30 locations before Blackwood. I want to say that up front, because I think it matters. We were not amateurs walking into something for the first time. We knew how to move through a dark building. We knew how to read a room for structural risk, how to bail when something felt genuinely dangerous rather than just spooky. None of that mattered, in the end, and I think that's the part one need you to sit with while I tell you this. Because if experience and caution could have saved us, they would have. Blackwood Sanatorium sits about 40 minutes outside the city, at the end of a county road that stops being maintained about a mile before the gate. It opened in 1922 as a tuberculosis sanatorium, one of dozens built across the country in that era on the theory that fresh air and isolation could cure a disease nobody yet had antibiotics for. By the 1950s, with TB treatment moving to antibiotics and outpatient care, places like Blackwood either closed or got repurposed, and Blackwood got repurposed, converted into a long-term psychiatric facility, the kind that existed before deinstitutionalization changed how the country handled mental illness. It operated in that capacity until 1979, when it closed following what every local account describes only as an incident, never elaborated on, at least not in any public record I've been able to find. The building has sat empty since. 40-some years of Pacific Northwest damp working into brick and plaster, 40-some years of local teenagers, and, eventually, people like us, finding ways through a fence that the county apparently gave up seriously maintaining sometime around the millennium. We'd wanted to film Blackwood for almost a year before we actually did it. It's well known in urbex circles. There are dozens of videos of it already online, most of them fairly similar, 10 or 15 minutes of flashlight-lit hallways, and peeling paint, and the specific melancholy of institutional architecture left to rot. What made us wait, honestly, wasn't fear. It was access. The site had gotten a reputation, in the last few years, for genuinely erratic security, an actual county contractor who patrolled irregularly and had, according to a couple of forum posts, caught and cited explorers as recently as that spring. We waited for a stretch of bad weather, on the theory that a security patrol was less likely on a night with driving rain, and we went in on a Friday in late October. I recognize the seasonal irony of that timing now. I promise you none of us thought about it that way going in. It was just when the weather cooperated. There were 4 of us. Me. I'll leave my name out of this the way I always do on the channel. You can call me Ren. That's what the comments call me anyway. Sabrina, who does most of our editing and had been the one pushing hardest to finally do Blackwood. Theo, who'd been with the channel since the beginning, our best camera operator, methodical, unflappable, the guy who'd talked all of us down off genuine bad decisions more than once over the years. And Marcus, newer to the group, maybe 6 months in, eager in the specific way new people are before a place teaches them what caution actually costs. We parked a half-mile down the county road and walked in, cameras rolling from the moment we cleared the tree line and the building came into view. 5 stories of dark brick. Most windows either boarded or simply broken out to black holes. A central block flanked by 2 long wings that gave it, from a distance, the shape of a shallow U. There's a specific quality abandoned institutional buildings have at night that's hard to convey unless you've stood in front of one. Not a haunted house quality, nothing theatrical, just an unbearable scale of emptiness. 5 stories, and roughly 200 rooms built to hold hundreds of people, standing there holding nothing at all. We got in through a service entrance on the east wing. A door whose lock had rusted open years before we ever showed up, according to the marks on the frame. Theo led with his camera. I had a handheld recorder running for ambient audio, the way we always do. It's mostly for the edit, atmospheric sound to layer under narration, and it's the reason I have as detailed and as accurate a record of what happened that night as I do, because I've gone back through nearly 6 hours of raw audio more times than I can count trying to understand it. The first hour was, genuinely, nothing. I want to be honest about that the way I was honest about the first day at Ashcombe in an earlier post of mine. Some of you might remember. It lulls you. We moved through the ground floor common areas, an old day room with rotted wicker furniture still arranged in a circle, like a group therapy session, had just been interrupted mid-conversation and never resumed. A nurse's station with a still intact appointment board. Chalk names long faded, but faintly legible if you angle the light right. We filmed all of it. Marcus found an old wheelchair folded against a wall and did a bit for the camera, sitting in it, joking about it being reserved. And Sabrina told him to knock it off in a tone that was half genuine unease and half performing unease for the footage, the way you do in this line of work when you're not sure yet which one you're actually feeling. It was on the second floor, in the East Wing, that we found the first thing that made all four of us go quiet for a real stretch of time. Not performed quiet, the real kind. Part 2. The directory. There was a floor directory mounted on the wall near the second floor stairwell, the kind you'd find in any institutional building. A framed board, room numbers, and their designated wards listed in faded typewritten strips slotted into little metal channels. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Ward A, rooms 201 through 220, Ward B, 221 through 240, a nursing supervisor's office, a supply room, a chapel. At the bottom of the board, below the last legitimate-looking entry, was a final strip, slightly different in font, slightly yellowed in a way that suggested it had been added later than the others, or possibly removed and reinserted at some point. It read, Ward 7, do not enter without authorization, rooms 700 to 799. We had, by that point, a working floor plan of the building, a scanned blueprint one of us had found on a historical preservation forum years earlier, kept on file specifically for planning this shoot. The blueprint showed 5 floors. It showed 6 wards, labeled A through F, spread across those 5 floors in a fairly standard institutional layout. It did not show a Ward 7. It did not show room numbers in the 700s at all. The highest room number on the entire blueprint, across all 5 floors, was 542. Maybe it's a numbering thing, Theo said, filming the directory board closely, panning down to that last strip. Like, floor times 100 plus a ward letter, and Ward 7 could be some kind of code, not an actual 7th floor. There's no 7th floor, Sabrina said. The building's 5 stories. You can see that from outside. Basement level, maybe. Sub-basement. Marcus, already moving on, already restless in the way he tended to be when a scene didn't have enough immediate visual interest for him, said, let's just find it. If it exists, we film it. If it doesn't, we've got a cool detail for the edit either way. I want to note, because I think it's important, that nobody in that stairwell felt real fear yet. Curiosity, yes. The specific thrill of finding something that might genuinely be undocumented, something none of the dozen prior Blackwood videos online had covered. That's a powerful pull in this line of work. Maybe the most powerful pull there is, stronger even than the fear that should have been building in the back of all our minds at the idea of a facility with an entire ward that officially didn't exist. We spent almost 40 minutes trying to find a way to Ward 7. Every stairwell we checked terminated normally at the 5th floor, opening onto a rooftop access door that was welded shut. The building's basement, which did exist, and which the blueprint did show, just not associated with any ward numbering, was a single-level, boiler room, laundry facility, morgue-adjacent cold storage room that Marcus insisted on filming for a solid 3 minutes despite the rest of us wanting to move on. No 6th floor. No sub-basement below the one we'd found. Nothing that could plausibly correspond to a 7th ward in any conventional reading of the building's architecture. It was Sabrina who found the door. Part 3. The door that wasn't on the blueprint. It was on the 3rd floor, in the West Wing, at the end of a hallway that the blueprint showed terminating in a supply closet. There was a supply closet there. We checked. It was exactly where the blueprint said, shelving still mounted, a few rotted cardboard boxes on the floor. But next to it, in the wall itself, was a door that the blueprint did not show at all. Not a modification, not an obvious later addition with different trim or hardware. The same brick, the same institutional green paint, peeling in the exact same pattern as every other door we'd filmed that night, aged in a way that suggested it had always been there, that suggested our blueprint, not the building, was the thing that was wrong. The door was unlocked. It opened onto a stairwell, descending, which should not have been possible given that we were on the 3rd floor and every other stairwell in the building ran the expected range from ground floor to 5th. Theo checked his own orientation twice, using the compass app on his phone, confirming we hadn't somehow lost track of which floor we were actually standing on. We were on 3. The stairwell descended anyway. Further than 3 floors worth of stairs should have taken us, based on step count alone. I remember Sabrina counting under her breath around step 40, which should have put us at ground level with room to spare, and the stairs kept going. We came out into a hallway that looked, on first glance, almost identical to every other institutional hallway we'd filmed that night. Same tile, same rotted wall paint, same water damage patterns on the ceiling. But the room numbers on the doors, when Theo's light found the first one, read 701. I want to describe what Ward 7 actually looked like, because I think the ordinariness of it, initially, is part of what made everything afterwards so much worse. It wasn't a dungeon. It wasn't dressed up with anything obviously sinister. It looked, for the first several rooms we passed, like an entirely normal wing of a psychiatric facility from the era. Small rooms, single beds, many with the frames still standing, a few with intact but filthy mattresses, personal effects here and there that must have belonged to patients decades ago and simply never been cleared out. It felt, if anything, more preserved than the rest of the building, as though this particular wing had been sealed off and left largely undisturbed while the rest of Blackwood had been picked over by decades of explorers, scrappers, and teenagers. Room 714 was the first one that stopped us cold. The door was closed, unlike most of the others, which stood open or ajar. Painted on it, in a hand that did not match the stenciled numbering on any other door in the building, was a single word, occupied. That's not original signage, Sabrina said, filming it closely. Look at the paint. It's newer than everything else down here. Not recent, but decades newer than the rest of this wing, maybe. Theo tried the door. It was locked, the only locked door we'd encountered anywhere in Blackwood that night. Everything else having long since given up whatever security it once had to 40 years of decay and forced entry. We should leave that one alone, Theo said, and I remember agreeing with him instantly, viscerally, in a way that surprised me given how little, up to that point, had actually happened. It wasn't a supernatural instinct exactly. It was closer to the feeling you get passing a house with a very clearly posted "Beware of Dog" sign, a completely mundane, rational unwillingness to test a boundary someone deliberately built. Marcus, predictably, wanted to force it. This is the whole video, he said. This is the thing nobody's ever filmed. We're not walking away from a locked door in a secret ward because it says occupied on it. We argued about it, quietly, the way you argue in a place like that, in hushed voices that don't carry, and in the end we didn't force the door. Not because Marcus gave up the idea, but because down the hallway, from somewhere past the reach of our lights, we heard the unmistakable sound of a metal wheel, unoiled, rolling slowly across old tile. Part 4. The Ledger. We froze. All 4 of us, lights aimed in the direction of the sound, which came from further down Ward 7, past a bend in the hallway we hadn't yet explored. The sound continued for maybe 10 seconds, a single wheel, or possibly 2, the specific uneven roll of an old gurney or wheelchair being pushed across uneven tile, moving at an unhurried, almost leisurely pace, and then stopped. Nobody said, "Let's go check it out." I want that on the record, because I think it's the one genuinely good instinct our whole group shared that night. Nobody wanted to see what was making that sound. What we did instead, in retrospect, might have been just as dangerous, but it felt, at the time, like the reasonable compromise between fleeing outright and walking toward a sound none of us wanted to identify. We kept moving down the hallway in the opposite direction from the sound, toward a door standing ajar that our lights had already picked out, hoping it led to an office, a records room, anything that might explain what Ward 7 actually was. It was a records room. Filing cabinets, mostly rusted shut, several drawers pulled open and left that way by whoever had been through before us. The room had clearly seen at least some prior traffic, unlike the rest of the ward, though nothing recent based on the dust. On a metal desk in the center of the room sat a single ledger book, bound in cracked leather, closed, undisturbed by dust in a way that stood out sharply against everything else in the room. Theo opened it. I have the footage of this, and I've watched it more times than is probably healthy, trying to see if there's some detail I missed the first dozen times. The ledger was a patient log, handwritten, dates running from what looked like the 1930s through, And this is the detail that made Sabrina audibly stop breathing for a second on the recording. Entries dated well past 1979, the year Blackwood officially closed. Entries dated into the 1990s. The 2000s. Entries, near the back of the ledger, dated within the last 2 years. Each entry followed a similar format: a name, a date of admission, a room number, and a brief note in the same handwriting throughout the entire book. The same hand, unchanged in style across what should have been nearly a century of use, which is its own kind of wrong that I don't think any of us fully processed until much later. Most notes were brief. Admitted per standard intake. Occupant count maintained. Some were longer, stranger. One entry, dated 1958, read, "Transfer from Ward 4 upon occupant's request. Ward 7 accepts. Count remains at capacity." Near the back, the entries changed in character. They stopped listing formal patient intakes and started listing names with no admission process described at all. Just a name, a date, a room number, and the same closing phrase every time. Occupant count maintained. Sabrina found, going back through the earlier pages later that week during editing, entries whose dates corresponded to known missing persons cases from local news archives. Hikers, a contractor who'd vanished doing asbestos survey work at the site in the early 2000s. 2 urban explorers whose disappearance had actually made regional news 4 years prior. A case we vaguely remembered discussing on an Urbex forum back when it happened. The second-to-last entry in the ledger was dated 11 months before our visit. Room 743. No name given, just 3 words where a name should have been. Occupant, self-selected. The last entry, the very last line in the entire book, was dated that night. October 24th. The date we were standing there reading it. Room number left blank. Name left blank. Only the closing phrase, already written, waiting, in that same unchanging handwriting. Occupant count to be maintained. Part 5. Marcus. We left the records room fast after that. As fast as you can move quietly through a dark hallway, while trying not to draw the attention of whatever had been pushing a gurney while somewhere behind us. We found the stairwell back up without much trouble, which in hindsight I think was a mercy we didn't deserve, given everything that had already gone wrong with this building's basic geometry, and we came up through the same unlisted door on the 3rd floor, back into the part of Blackwood the blueprint actually acknowledged. We should have left the building entirely at that point. I want to say that clearly, the way I've wanted to say it about every mistake in every account like this. There is always a moment where the obviously correct choice is simply to leave, and there is always a version of the people involved who talk themselves out of it, and I was one of those people, and I don't have a good excuse beyond the same one that's probably in every story like this. We told ourselves we needed a few more minutes of footage to make the video complete, needed to at least get establishing shots of the upper floors we hadn't covered yet. Needed some kind of closure on the ledger before we could process what we'd actually found. We split up on the 4th floor. This was the actual mistake, the one specific decision I'd undo if I could undo exactly one thing about that night. Theo and Sabrina went to cover the East Wing, filming a proper walkthrough for B-roll, while Marcus and I took the West Wing, planning to meet back at the central stairwell in 20 minutes. Marcus and I got separated within about 10 of those 20 minutes. In a way that still doesn't fully make sense to me. We were in the same hallway. I stopped to film a detail, an old wall-mounted call button, the kind patients would have used to summon a nurse, miraculously still wired, and, when I nudged it out of pure morbid curiosity, faintly, impossibly lit. And when I looked up, maybe 8-10 seconds later, Marcus was not where he'd been standing 15 feet ahead of me. The hallway was empty. Not empty in the sense that he'd walked further down it, and out of my flashlight's reach. I could see all the way to the hallway's end, and there was no one there, no door swinging closed, nothing. I called his name. Not loudly. Some instinct, by that point, had thoroughly convinced all of us that loud noise in this building was a bad idea. So my calling was more of an urgent hiss than a shout. Nothing answered. I checked every door along that stretch of hallway. All of them either locked in ways that didn't look freshly disturbed or opening onto small, empty patient rooms with no other exit. I found Theo and Sabrina at the meeting point, both of them, without Marcus, both of them assuming he was with me. We spent the next hour looking for him, quietly, methodically, the way you're trained to search a building if you do this kind of exploring seriously, working room by room, calling his name at intervals just loud enough to carry without echoing into something that might draw the wrong kind of attention. We found him on the 5th floor, in a hallway none of the three of us remembered having checked, sitting in a wheelchair, an actual wheelchair, matching in style and rust pattern the ones we'd filmed on the ground floor hours earlier, positioned in the center of the hall, facing away from us, toward a window whose boards had partially rotted through, letting in a thin gray wash of pre-dawn light none of us had realized was already starting to arrive. He didn't respond when I said his name. Theo got in front of him, crouched down to his eye level, and Marcus looked at him. Looked through him, really, the specific unfocused quality of someone's gaze that made all three of us go cold in a way none of the ledger, none of the gurney's sound, none of anything else that night had quite matched. He was breathing normally. His pupils reacted to light. Physically, by every measure we could check in that hallway with a phone flashlight and no medical training, he seemed unharmed. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, gentle, almost, in a way that was somehow so much worse than if he'd been screaming. "I'm fine," he said. "I've been assigned. It's room 743. I already signed in. Part 6, what the building wanted. I don't fully know how to convey the next 40 minutes, because they were the worst of my life, and because Marcus, for most of it, was not being combative or frightening in any conventional horror story way. He was calm. He was pleasant, even, in a hollowed-out way that made my skin crawl worse than any aggression would have. He explained, patiently, when we asked, that he'd been shown his room by someone he described only as the one who does the intake, that the arrangement made sense to him, that he understood now that Blackwood had never actually stopped operating, not really, that it simply operated according to a different, older logic than the county's closure paperwork accounted for, an occupancy requirement. A specific number of patients that had to be maintained at all times, going back to whatever the sanatorium had actually been built on top of or built to serve, long before tuberculosis or psychiatry gave it a public-facing purpose. Somebody left, he told us, still seated in that wheelchair, still facing the window, refusing every time we tried to physically get him to stand. Room 743 was open. It's been open 11 months. It needed someone. We tried to physically move him. I want to be honest that this went badly. The moment Theo actually took hold of his arm to lift him, Marcus's calm dropped away entirely, replaced by a genuine, animal panic, a thrashing, screaming refusal that was so much more frightening than the calm had been, precisely because it confirmed that some part of him understood, on some level, exactly what was happening and was terrified of being moved from it. He quieted the instant Theo let go, snapping back into that same gentle, glassy calm within seconds, like a switch had been thrown. Sabrina, crying, asking him if he understood he had a life outside this building, a mother, an apartment, a girlfriend he'd been with for 2 years. He nodded through all of it, agreed with all of it, said he understood, said he was sorry, and then, in the same breath, said that none of that changed the fact that room 743 needed someone and he had already signed the ledger, that the ledger doesn't let you unsign once you're written in, that the building had explained this to him very clearly and very kindly, and that the kindest thing we could do for him now was let it be finished properly instead of dragging it out. I want to tell you we found some way to save him right there, in that hallway. I want to tell you we found a loophole, a way to force the issue, something clever that undid whatever had happened. We did not. What we found, what I am still not able to fully forgive myself for finding, even though every account I've read since suggests there was no better option available to us, was that the building itself, at that point, seemed to be waiting to see what we would do next, in a way that felt distinctly, uncomfortably like it was offering us a choice. Theo was the one who understood it first, I think, faster than I did, faster than Sabrina did. He said, quietly, almost to himself, the ledger said occupant count to be maintained. Present tense. Ongoing. Not has been maintained. It needed one more name tonight. It's already decided that name is going to come from this hallway. The only thing left to decide is whether it's him or one of us instead. I don't know if that's exactly true. I don't know if the building operates on anything as legible as a rule that could be gamed or negotiated. But in that hallway, at what must have been close to 5 in the morning, with the window light strengthening behind Marcus's unmoving silhouette, it felt true in a way that mattered more than whether it was literally mechanically accurate. Marcus made the decision for us, in the end. He looked at the three of us, really looked, for a second, the fog behind his eyes clearing just enough that I believe, to this day, some part of the actual Marcus was still in there, still capable of choosing something. And he said, very quietly, "Go. I mean it. Go now, before it changes its mind about which one of us it wants." Part 7. What's left of the floor? We left him there. I have relived that decision every single day since, and I still do not know a version of that hallway where the outcome is better than the one we chose. We ran. Actually ran, for the first time all night, no longer worried about staying quiet, because staying quiet had stopped matching the moment Marcus told us to go. Down through the 5th floor, down the actual, blueprint-verified stairwell this time, out through the same service door we'd entered 8 hours earlier, into a gray, wet, ordinary dawn that felt so profoundly unreal after everything we'd just left behind that I remember standing in the wet grass outside just breathing for almost a full minute before any of us could speak. We reported Marcus missing that same morning, obviously. We told the responding officers a version of the truth that omitted the ledger, the wheel sound, everything that wouldn't survive contact with a police report. We said we'd gotten separated exploring the building and hadn't been able to find him, which was true as far as it went. A search was conducted. It turned up nothing, no trace of him on any floor, including the 5th floor hallway where we'd left him, which by the time searchers reached it that afternoon showed no sign a wheelchair had ever been there at all. The search also, according to the deputy who eventually called us with an update 6 days later, turned up no Ward 7. No stairwell behind the 3rd floor supply closet. No records room. No ledger. The blueprint, when officially resurveyed as part of the investigation, matched the building's actual current floor plan exactly. 5 floors, no discrepancies, no unlisted rooms in the 700s. I have our footage. I have watched our footage of that stairwell, that hallway, that ledger, more times than I can count, and it is all there, clearly, undeniably filmed. And I believe, though I cannot prove it and do not expect anyone reading this to simply take my word for it, that the building does not actually care whether outsiders can find Ward 7 unless it has already decided to let them in. Marcus's mother has not stopped searching. I don't blame her. I have not told her everything, and I don't know if I ever will, because I don't know what a person is supposed to do with the true version of what happened to her son beyond causing her more pain without giving her anything she can act on. I went back to Blackwood once more, alone, about 6 weeks later. I want to be honest that I don't fully understand why, except that some part of me needed to see the 3rd floor hallway again in daylight, needed to look at that supply closet with my own eyes and confirm, one way or another, whether the door was really gone. It was brick, unbroken, the same age paint as every other stretch of that wall, no seam, no evidence a door had ever been cut into it at all. I stood there for a long time. And then, because I could not stop myself, because some part of me has never stopped needing to know, I said his name, quietly, into that stretch of blank wall. Nothing answered. I don't know if that's meant to be a comfort or its own kind of confirmation. What I do know is that our footage from that night has become, since we finally posted an edited version of it 8 months ago, one of the most watched videos our channel has ever put out, and that in the months since, according to a private message a viewer sent us 2 weeks ago, at least 3 separate small urbex groups have gone looking for Ward 7 on their own, inspired by our video, treating the ledger as a kind of dare rather than a warning. One of those 3 groups, according to that same message, has not posted anything on their own channel since late last month. I don't know how to end this the way I'd like to, with a clean warning, a clear rule, something as simple as don't answer when it calls or don't give it a name. Blackwood doesn't seem to need you to break a rule. It seems to simply need, at intervals none of us understand, one more name in a ledger that never stops being current, and it will take whichever name is standing closest to an open room when the count comes due. If you ever find a building like that, sealed off, half forgotten, a wing that isn't on any map anyone official will admit exists, I am asking you, the way Hollis asked us at a different trailhead in a different story I've told before, and the way I wish someone had asked us before we ever walked through that service door. Don't go looking for the parts of a building that don't want to be